Back in the early days, when everything felt like a mad scramble to get a foot in the door, Aaron and I were unstoppable. We were two guys with a dream, working out of my tiny apartment in Cincinnati, crammed between coffee cups and old pizza boxes. We had this idea, a logistics app, that we were convinced would change the world. Aaron had the vision, the energy, and the pitch to back it up. I was the quiet one, the one who dug into the details, making sure the tech actually worked. He'd talk big in meetings, while I just made sure the code didn't crash. We complemented each other, or so I thought. We managed to secure a few small investments, enough to hire a team, and before long, we were growing. Fast. We were the talk of the tech world. Aaron, with his smooth charm, was the face of it all. He'd walk into meetings like he owned the place, shaking hands, flashing that smile, and reeling in more money than I ever thought we'd see. Me? I stayed behind the scenes, happy to let him take the credit. It was a partnership. He had the charisma, and I had the brains. That was the deal. But as time went on, something started to shift. It was subtle at first, just little things. Aaron taking more credit in meetings, pushing me aside when it came to talking strategy. At first, I shrugged it off. Maybe he was just playing the role he had to play. After all, someone had to sell the dream to the investors, right? But when I heard him on that podcast, claiming to be the sole architect behind everything, something inside me snapped. I sat there, listening to him tell the world how he built this company from the ground up, while I was just some afterthought in the background. That's when I knew I had to protect what was mine. I drafted a contract between us, something that would ensure I had control over the intellectual property we'd built. It wasn't personal, it was just business. After all, I designed the core tech of our app. But even then, I had no idea just how far Aaron was willing to go to erase me from the story. It was about a month after the podcast incident when Aaron called me into the office for a talk. His face looked drawn, like he hadn't slept in days. I'd seen that look before, the kind of desperation that comes when the numbers aren't adding up, or the pressure is about to break the guy. He was pacing around the conference room, running a hand through his hair, barely stopping long enough to meet my eyes. "Dave, we need to talk about the books," he said, voice tight. I sat down at the table, feeling that familiar tension creeping in. "What about them?" He took a deep breath, then dove right into it. "We're heading into a major funding round, and the equity split. It's not ideal for investors. We need to smooth things out, make it look cleaner." I could feel my stomach drop. Whenever Aaron started talking like this, it meant something was off. "You want me to change the numbers?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he ran a finger over the edge of the table, thinking it through. "Not change, just adjust. Make it look more streamlined, more efficient, you know? If we don't, we're going to lose this chance. We're trying to raise $25 million, Dave. This is huge." I could see the pressure on him. I knew what was at stake. Our success had always been built on a razor-thin margin, and this round was the one that could take us from a growing startup to something legit. But the uneasy feeling in my gut didn't go away. "Are you saying we hide the equity split?" I asked, my voice low, cautious. Aaron's eyes locked onto mine, his usual charm gone. "Not hide, just present it in a way that doesn't scare off investors. They don't need to know every little detail, right?" I stared at him, unsure. Something didn't sit right, but I didn't know what else to say. We needed this. I needed this. But at what cost? "Look, I'll agree to it, but I want a side agreement," I said. "Something in writing that acknowledges the discrepancy, just in case things go south." He frowned, almost like I was being too cautious. "It's a formality, Dave. Nothing's going to go wrong." But I wasn't convinced. He scribbled his signature on the side letter, and when I looked at it, the signature was rushed, faint. I knew Aaron. He didn't do anything without making sure it was perfect. This? It felt like he was trying to brush it under the rug, as if he wanted it to be forgotten. "Aaron," I said slowly, "this isn't exactly what I had in mind." "Don't overthink it, man," he snapped. "Once we close the deal, we'll be fine." I wanted to argue more, but I didn't. I just signed. Business was business, right? So I pushed my doubts aside, just like I had so many times before. The next few weeks went by in a blur. The funding round went through, and we secured the money. Everything looked golden on the surface. But behind the scenes, I started to feel like I was disappearing. Aaron was everywhere. He was at investor meetings, on panels, getting his face plastered all over the press. Meanwhile, I was still stuck in the office, heads down, working on the tech. I'd be sitting in a meeting and the discussion would circle around to the company's success, how we'd revolutionize the logistics sector, how we were poised to dominate the market, and Aaron would get all the praise. He'd throw out words like visionary, founder, game changer. And I'd sit there, listening to him take credit for everything, while my contributions, my sweat and hours, got tossed aside. I didn't expect him to shout my name from the rooftops, but the more I thought about it, the more it hurt. Was this what we had become? A partnership where one person took the credit and the other did all the work in silence? I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe I was just being sensitive. But then I saw it. It was a random morning, just another rush of emails and meetings, when I stumbled across an investor presentation that one of the team members had left open on their laptop. I glanced at it, and my heart sank. The slide was filled with buzzwords, fancy graphics, and a breakdown of the company's growth. But as I skimmed it, something jumped out at me. There was no mention of me, not as a co-founder, not as the one who designed the core tech. Nothing. Just Aaron, front and center, like it was his show from the start. I closed the laptop fast, my hands shaking. I had a gut feeling I couldn't ignore anymore. Aaron had been erasing me, little by little, and now he was rewriting history. The worst part? I had no real proof, nothing concrete, just whispers of betrayal, little cracks that were getting bigger. The months that followed only deepened the rift between Aaron and me. It started small, him pulling me out of meetings, shifting more and more of the decision-making to his side, until it became impossible to ignore. Where once we had talked about we and us, now it was all I and my team. Every time he spoke, it felt like he was separating himself from the work we'd done together, like he was building this empire on his own. I wasn't part of the vision anymore, not in his eyes. I tried to bring it up once. "Remember when we used to make these decisions together?" I asked, catching him after a meeting where he'd basically dismissed everything I said. Aaron just shrugged, his gaze already shifting past me. "We're past that, Dave. We've got a company to run. You should focus on the tech. Let me handle the bigger picture." I couldn't even find the words to argue with him. What could I say? I was focused on the tech. I was the one keeping everything running, but now I was being shut out of the bigger decisions. Aaron had already started talking about hiring an executive team, bringing in outsiders, people who weren't a part of our story, while I kept sitting in the background, just another cog in the machine. That's when it hit me. The company was no longer ours. It was Aaron's, and he was building it without me. I was just some detail he could leave behind. A few weeks later, I got the memo. It was a formal letter from Aaron, something corporate, slick, full of buzzwords that made my blood boil. The subject line was restructuring proposal, new equity split, and leadership roles. My heart sank as I clicked it open. In short, Aaron was proposing to downsize my role. It wasn't even a polite suggestion. It was a cold, calculated move to strip me of everything. My title, once Chief Technical Officer, was now Advisor, effective immediately. The reasoning? My legal background didn't align with the company's growth anymore. We weren't a startup anymore, he said. We were a scalable business that needed people with a different skill set. I'd been through a lot with Aaron, but this felt like the last straw. I read that memo over twice, each word hitting harder than the last. I'd spent years building the backbone of this company, the product that investors were now salivating over. And Aaron was telling me I wasn't needed anymore, not in the way I had been. I wasn't just being sidelined anymore. I was being kicked to the curb. I spent the next few hours trying to keep my cool, but it wasn't working. The anger started building, a knot in my stomach that wouldn't untangle. I knew Aaron was trying to marginalize me. This was his big play to have full control, and I had no intention of letting him get away with it. The pressure was on. Aaron wanted me to sign the new agreement before the upcoming funding round went through. He kept pushing me, sending more emails, dropping by my office with that same rehearsed smile. But I wasn't stupid. I knew what this was. It wasn't a move for the company's good. It was a power grab, pure and simple. I refused. "Aaron," I said one afternoon, after one too many emails asking me to sign, "I'm not signing this, not without a conversation. This isn't right. He smiled, the kind of smile I hadn't seen since the old days when everything was smooth between us. But now it felt more like a mask. Dave, you've got to see the bigger picture. This is for the company's growth. Trust me. We need to bring in the right people. I'm one of the right people, I shot back. I've been here since the start. You can't just rewrite the story because you don't need me in the spotlight anymore. Aaron didn't flinch. He just nodded, his eyes scanning over his phone like he had somewhere else to be. You'll come around? This is business, Dave. It's not personal. It felt personal to me. It felt like he was erasing everything we'd built together, and I wasn't going to let it happen. So I started gathering evidence, quietly. Every email, every meeting, every conversation where he downplayed my role or manipulated the company's narrative, I kept it all. I knew that if I was going to go up against him, I needed more than just my word. I needed something that would hold up. I reached out to Simon, an old friend from law school who'd gone on to become a top corporate lawyer. He was skeptical at first, but when I explained the situation, he agreed to help. This could get ugly, he warned me. But you've got a case, Dave. If you want to fight this, we'll make it happen. I had no illusions. This wouldn't be a simple fix. Aaron wasn't just a partner anymore. He was a power player. But Simon was right. I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for the truth. The more I watched Aaron, the more arrogant he became. He'd started planning the IPO, without consulting me, of course. He was pushing ahead, claiming he was the sole founder, the sole visionary. And I knew, deep down, that if I didn't act soon, he'd have full control of everything we'd built. One afternoon, I walked past his office and saw a pile of papers on his desk, something he'd left out in the open, probably not expecting me to see it. I couldn't help myself. I glanced over, and there it was, a draft of the IPO filing. As I scanned the document, my blood ran cold. Aaron was preparing to file for the IPO as the sole owner of the company. He was claiming full ownership of everything, including the intellectual property I'd created. It was all right there in black and white. He had made it look like he'd built the company by himself, leaving me out entirely. Again. I stood frozen for a second, the weight of it hitting me like a punch to the gut. This was it. Aaron wasn't just trying to push me out. He was trying to erase me from the entire story. I couldn't let this slide. I wasn't going to let him steal what I'd worked for. The pieces were finally in place. The plan I'd been building had a clear target. Now it was time to bring everything to light. But I knew I had to wait for the right moment, the perfect moment to drop the bombshell. The stakes were too high for me to rush it. The day of the IPO roadshow arrived, and the air was thick with excitement. It felt like everyone in the company was buzzing, except for me. I was just another face in the crowd, officially a founding advisor, which meant I was supposed to be there to lend some credibility, but in reality, I was invisible. I sat in the back of the packed ballroom in downtown New York, watching Aaron take his place at the podium. He was in his element, speaking with the kind of confidence that only someone who thought they owned everything could have. Investors were everywhere, sharp suits, shiny shoes, eager faces, all there to hear Aaron sell them on our company, the one he had single-handedly built in their eyes. I was supposed to be a part of this, but now I was just a ghost. As Aaron began his keynote speech, listing off our innovations and our growth, my anger bubbled up again, just like it had for months. He was making it sound like this was all his doing, like he had dragged us from nothing to this moment, and I wasn't even a footnote in the story anymore. I could feel the crowd hanging on every word, swallowing every lie he told, but not anymore. It was time to step into the light, even if I had to drag the truth with me. I stood up slowly in the back, the red folder clutched tightly in my hands. It felt heavier than it should have, like the weight of everything I had to lose if this went wrong. But I didn't care anymore. This was it. The room fell quiet as I made my way down the aisle, my footsteps sharp on the hardwood floor. Aaron's eyes caught mine, and for a split second, his face shifted from confident to panicked. He knew I was coming for him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I walked straight to the front, ignoring Aaron's frantic gestures from the stage, the way his hands started to reach out like he could somehow pull me back with a word or a look. But I wasn't going to be his pawn anymore. I handed the red folder to Peter, one of the senior investors in the front row. He blinked, clearly confused, but I didn't give him time to ask questions. "Read it," I said, my voice steady, but I could feel the heat behind the words. It's time everyone knew the truth. Peter opened the folder, flipped through the pages, and started reading aloud. I could hear the murmurs spreading through the room, the investors leaning forward as he read out the clauses that proved Aaron had lied about the company's ownership. Aaron's face went pale. He stopped mid-sentence, his voice faltering. His eyes locked on me, a mixture of disbelief and fury flashing across his face. He tried to recover, but it was too late. "This is nothing but a disgruntled ex-partner," Aaron tried to say, his voice trembling, though he was doing his best to mask it. "He's angry, and this is just a personal vendetta." He waved a hand dismissively, trying to regain control. But the damage was done. The investors weren't looking at him the way they had just moments ago. The confidence was gone. The excitement about the IPO, it was evaporating fast. I took a step forward, cutting Aaron off before he could try to talk his way out of it. "The truth is," I said, my voice loud enough for the room to hear, "the core technology of this company was never Aaron's to sell. I'm the one who built it. I'm the one who made it work. And without me, none of this would be possible. So, no, it's not just Aaron's company, not anymore." I saw the moment it clicked for the investors. They started to pull back, some of them glancing at each other, whispering. A few stood up, shaking their heads. The excitement was gone. The dream had turned into a nightmare. Aaron was still trying to salvage it, but I could see it in his face. He knew the IPO was dead in the water. His world, the one he'd spent so long building on lies, was crumbling. "You can't do this!" Aaron shouted, his voice rising. He stepped down from the podium, his face flushed. "You're making a mistake. You're ruining everything." I didn't flinch. "You already did that, Aaron. I'm just making sure the truth gets out before you sell it off to the highest bidder." The investors were already standing, some of them grabbing their coats, muttering among themselves. They knew this wasn't just a company anymore. It was a mess, a lawsuit waiting to happen. The IPO was officially canceled. Aaron's face was white now, his whole body shaking. He tried to pull himself together, to look calm, but it was too late. The room had already made up its mind. The investors were walking out, and with them, Aaron's chance at the IPO, and the empire he thought he'd built. I stood there, watching as everything fell apart. Aaron was still standing, trying to gather himself, but it was clear now. The narrative had changed. The company wasn't his anymore. The investors were gone. His lies had unraveled in front of everyone, and there was no turning back. The power was back in my hands, but as I watched him try to salvage what was left of his career, I realized one thing. No matter what happened next, Aaron had already lost. The days after the IPO disaster felt like a slow-motion collapse. The investors, stunned and furious, wasted no time in pulling out. The board convened in an emergency meeting, and it didn't take long for Aaron to be fired. They didn't just let him go. They dragged his name through the mud. Headlines screamed about his manipulation, his lies, the shady deals he'd tried to pull behind closed doors. For the first time in years, it felt like the world was finally seeing him for what he was, a fraud. But as the company crumbled, I couldn't shake the weight in my chest. I had won, yes, but it felt hollow. The place I'd poured everything into, the company we'd built, was unraveling. The financial devastation was hard to ignore. The board was looking to liquidate the company to recover some of the losses, and the employees who had worked with us for so long, they were scrambling, uncertain of their futures. Some of them walked away, some of them stuck around for a few final paychecks. There was nothing left for anyone. Even my shares, once worth millions, were now little more than scraps. But in the end, that didn't matter. What mattered was that I still had what I'd always cared about, the intellectual property, the tech I'd created. I'd kept it, legally protected it, and now it was mine. Aaron could take the glory and the accolades, but the truth was he had never owned the thing that had built the company in the first place. The product, the core tech. That was mine. Sitting in my empty office, the phone quiet for the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of vindication. The bitterness of losing everything didn't sting as much as I thought it would. Maybe because, for the first time, I felt like I was in control again. The thing was, I wasn't in this for the money anymore. What mattered now was my reputation, and Aaron's betrayal had stripped him of his. It wasn't about getting rich off an IPO or climbing some corporate ladder anymore. It was about rebuilding with integrity, starting fresh without the weight of his lies hanging over me. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't looking to start another high-flying startup with the same ambitions Aaron had. I'd learned the hard way that ambition without integrity was a toxic thing. So I gathered a small team, some of the folks who'd been loyal to me, who had seen what Aaron had done and had left when they saw the writing on the wall. We weren't aiming for the moon this time, no flashy IPOs or billion-dollar exits. We were going to build something that worked, that lasted, and that honored the contributions of everyone involved. We started from scratch. It wasn't glamorous, working out of a cramped office, fighting just to stay afloat. But it felt right. We worked together, shoulder to shoulder, each person contributing something valuable. We weren't playing games, we were just getting the job done. Still, the financial strain was real, and as much as I hated to admit it, I knew the company we were building wasn't going to move fast enough to pull me out of the mess Aaron had left behind. I had to think strategically. That's when I reached out to a competitor, someone I knew could use our technology, someone who respected the work we'd done and could offer the financial stability I needed. It wasn't the plan I'd imagined when I first started this whole journey, but it was a way forward. We worked out a deal. I sold the intellectual property, the tech I'd spent years perfecting. It wasn't about selling out. It was about making sure that my work and the legacy of what we'd built had a future. The deal gave me a solid financial footing, and it also allowed me to keep a seat at the table, still involved in the tech, still driving the innovation forward. Aaron, on the other hand, he was still trying to salvage whatever was left of his reputation, chasing after whatever new venture would give him the spotlight again. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't undo what had been done. The world had seen him for what he was, and it wasn't long before people started distancing themselves. No matter how many self-help books he sold or speaking gigs he landed, it didn't change the fact that he'd burned every bridge he had. I couldn't help but feel a bit of satisfaction when I saw him, trying so hard to hold on to his image. He could put on a show, but the truth was out now. He was finished. And me? I wasn't the quiet partner anymore. I wasn't the guy hiding behind the scenes, watching someone else take all the credit. I was the one making the decisions now. I was the one calling the shots. Maybe I'd lost millions, but I'd regained my dignity, my control, my life. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was heading in the right direction again. The new company was growing, but it was slow. We were working out of a small office in a warehouse district, far away from the shiny glass buildings where the tech elite gathered. There were no fancy perks, no catered lunches, no flashy marketing campaigns. We didn't even have a dedicated receptionist. It was just us, me and a handful of people who believed in what we were doing. Every day was a grind, but it was a grind I could respect. It felt real. We didn't have the same high-flying ambitions I once had with Aaron. We weren't trying to make a billion-dollar exit or land on the cover of some business magazine. We were doing the work, plain and simple. And every time we hit a small milestone, landing a new client, releasing an update, solving a tricky bug, I felt a sense of fulfillment I hadn't felt in years. The kind of satisfaction that came from doing things the right way, without cutting corners, without pretending. I'd check Aaron's social media occasionally. It wasn't healthy, I knew, but curiosity had a way of winning out. He was still out there, pushing his brand, trying to sell some self-help program to anyone who would listen. His followers were shrinking, the comments more critical with every post. He wasn't fooling anyone anymore. The arrogance that had once made him so charming was the same arrogance that had ruined his career. Now, it was just a joke. I couldn't feel sorry for him, not anymore. He'd made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. The way he'd used people, manipulated them, lied to them, he'd burned every bridge he had. And for what? So he could stand up in front of crowds and act like he was the one who had built everything? So he could play the role of the self-made visionary? I didn't need to watch him destroy himself. I already knew how this story ended. Sometimes, when I was alone in my office late at night, I'd catch myself smiling to myself. I'd never thought I'd be here, building a company from the ground up again, but it felt right. It felt like I was finally on the path I was meant to take. It wasn't the easy road, but it was mine. The journey had been long, full of twists I hadn't expected, but the most important lesson I'd learned was this. I didn't need anyone's approval, not Aaron's, not anyone else's. I wasn't in this to prove something to the world. I was in this because it was what I wanted to do. I was finally doing it my way, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough.